everybody, welcome back to Rink's Garage. We're going to do a quick little video today on changing some wheel bearings in the back of the 66. She had a nasty growl driving down the road, so did a little looking, and turns out we never checked the oil in the rear end when we started driving it, and she's pretty much empty. So pull the wheel off and take her apart, and I'll show you what I found. I had it apart once and couldn't get bearings in time, so I threw a little oil on them, stuck them back together. But I'll get the wheel off and we'll start tearing her apart. Well, got the wheel off. So this old one, it's kind of got floating drums, but it does have two screws that hold it on, so I'll have to pull these screws off, slide the drum off. Like I said, this one I have had apart already. I just had to throw her back together. But when we started working on the truck, this brake was locked up. So she doesn't have any brakes in there. Just ripped it all out. So now we got the hub off, or the drum, and pull the axle out. So on these guys, it's got a bolted in axle to the outside. Should be the same on any 60s, 70s, 80s 3/4 ton Chevy. So pull all these bolts out. Then should be able to just slide the axle right out. Next thing we gotta do is take the retaining nuts off. So this style, she's got tang washer with some tabs that are bent over to keep the nut from spinning off, so you gotta straighten them out. Then we can just tap her loose with the chisel. Take the outer nut off, tang washer, and then spin the inner nut out. Then the hub should come off. Now, of course, if you had a rear end that had oil in it, you'd probably have oil running out, so be good to drain that oil first. Like I said, I had this one apart and knew there wasn't enough oil in it, so now we should be able to wiggle on her. Outer bearing will fall off, and then you can slide the whole hub off. As you can see, she's still pretty dry there. We'll clean up all this surface where the bearings sit. Then we got to get the bearing out of here, so I'll show you how we do that. So you're going to want to set your hub up off the ground, because you got to pound that bearing and seal out. A lot of times the drum will work if you just flip the drum over. I got her setting up there, and then I'm just going to take my punch and tap on the inner part of the bearing on each side, and she should fall out. As you can see, I squirted a little oil, but there's a lot of grit in there, and this bearing is super loose. She started wearing the rollers off. It was completely dry and it was growling. So now we can clean up the hub. So let's take this, spray it out with some brake clean, get her all cleaned up, and then we'll throw in some new bearings. And on that note, I did not get new seals, so we're going to reuse these ones. So we got the hub all cleaned up. So we can grab our bearings, and I was able to find some bearings. The outer was easy to find in town. The inner one, the big one, was not. Ended up going to John Deere, and it was actually cheaper than the Timken one. take our bearing, and this is where if you had some bearing grease, it'd be nice. I don't, so we're just going to use some grease gun grease. We're just going to want to rub some in the bearing, get her packed in there as good as we can to lube her up. Also a good idea, like when you got a bearing that as bad as this one, it's probably a good time to change the races in the hub, but we're going to end up putting a new rear end in this guy, so we're just going to run. It's actually pretty smooth, so should be fine. And I lied when I said I was going to reuse the seal. After cleaning it up, the rubber part of the seal is pushed up inside there, so she doesn't do anything. So I went into town. Of course, they had one new one. So we'll put a little grease on the sealing surface. We're going to put this in with the beveled side out so she'll slide on. And then, very carefully, we'll tap her in. Good time to have a seal installer, but this works. So there we got our seal in. Now we can slide her back on the axle shaft. Now we can take our hub, slide her back on if it'll go on. Might need a little persuasion. Make sure she gets on all the way. Looks like we're there. And we can put our outer bearing back on, which I already greased up. Slide him in. Throw the inner nut back on. Now, this is where it'd be nice to have a socket that fit the inner nut, which I do not have. So we're just going to go by feel. We want it to be tight, but we don't want it so tight it binds up the bearing. So I'm just going to use my chisel and snug her down until I don't feel any end play. Make sure she's tight, not binding. I think it's right there. Of course, we'll put a couple 100 miles on it and pull it off and check them. Throw our tang washer back on. And the outer nut. One of my tangs is not completely flattened out. Get him in there and just lock her down. And then grab a screwdriver, bend one or two of the tangs over to keep that nut from backing off. There we go. So I threw a layer of silicone on there. Now we can slide our axle shaft back in. And you're gonna have to put a little pressure on it to get her to go back in. Line her up. And we can put our bolts back in. Throw our drum back on. And now we're ready for our wheel and tire. Well, there you have it. She's all changed up, good as new, maybe. Last thing we'll have to do is pop that fill plug out and probably put some oil in it, because I'm guessing it doesn't have a lot. So, but we should be good to go down the road again, I hope. But that's going to do it for this episode, and we'll see you next time.